This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Worldwide climate demonstrations kick off. South Sudan President Salva Kiir warns rival over unity government. And UN says child deaths and maternal mortality rates have declined significantly since 2000. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. In business, relief as pilots call off their planned strike at Kenya Airways. And in sports, rugby mania touches down in Japan as the 2019 World Cup kicks off. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. We start with climate change. Rallies are being held around the world today calling for more action against climate change. In Australia, thousands of students have walked out of classrooms to kick off a global protest. They're demanding world leaders attending a UN Climate Action Summit in New York to adopt urgent measures to curb climate change. Similar protests inspired by 16-year-old Swedish activist Greta Thunberg are planned in over 100 countries today. The teenager made headlines last month when she sailed across the Atlantic to New York on a zero-emissions boat. Well, in Africa, various countries are also holding events on climate change. In Uganda's capital, Kampala, for instance, hundreds of young people are demanding greater action on things like climate change and deforestation. The protest comes a day before the UN's Youth Climate Summit in New York.
We have to make the world a safe place and sustainably so, to make sure that the young people who are surviving today and the generation who are surviving today will be able to live, survive, and thrive in the world tomorrow.
I would like to request the government of Uganda to put strict rules on the pollution of the environment, because we are the masses out there, but they are the policy makers, and we are just at the receiving end. So if we as young people come together, it's the role of the ruling government to also support us and spread our voices far and wide.
We feel as a young generation we should come up to first of all draw attention of authorities to say that yes, we know that there is economic development which we desire most as a country, but we also need sustainable development. We don't need to destroy nature.
All right, for more on climate change, we have an interesting conversation with George Achia, a science journalist and also an environmentalist right here in Kenya. George, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Great to have you. First things first, the effect of climate change in the continent are well documented. And our governments, the question I need to ask you, are governments being more assertive? Are they being assertive enough in pushing clean energy across the continent?
Yeah, thank you for having me for this interesting discussion. I would say that African governments are really trying, to push for clean energy and some actions to address the impact of climate change. And I will take the global approach, and if you look at the global level, there are some ongoing initiatives and actions that are being taken by governments globally to address the impact of climate change, and also to push for clean energy. Mm-hmm. Of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, of the Kyoto Protocols. All those are some of the global initiatives that governments are adopting to push for actions on climate change. Mm-hmm. If you come at a regional level in Africa continent, we have continental actions like the African Union's strategy on climate change. Mm-hmm. We also have the African Ministerial Committee on Environment, and also within East Africa we have the East Africa strategy on climate change. Mm-hmm. All these really have specific instrument or actions that governments need to align to address action on climate change on different African continent. And therefore, I would say that given all these global, regional, and even national initiatives, I would say that African governments really are trying, to take some specific actions to address the impact of climate change in Africa.
All right, George, we have a couple more questions for you, but I'm going to get in our colleague, Leon Siyenga. He's also joining us in this conversation. I want to ask him a few questions on climate change. Leon, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. First things first for you, Leon, give us an update on those protests in Kampala.
Well, Richard, it's been an interesting day here in the capital, Kampala. Hundreds of young Ugandans took to the streets. The campaign, of course, was centered around 4 major towns, and those are towns that have several young Ugandans and mostly university students. So several of them at about 8 o'clock local time walked all the way from wherever they were to the city center where we are now in the capital. And of course, like you probably could be hearing, there's quite some music and campaigning going on right behind me. And yes, it's been a day where several of these young people have come out to say that they want their government to do more. They want their government to actually implement some of the policies that have already been put in place. Later this afternoon, they'll be heading to the parliament to hand over their petition to the Speaker, Honorable Rebecca Kadaga. So it's from this that many feel that a little bit more action should definitely be done. So yes, Uganda hasn't, of course, taken itself out of this particular campaign, and there certainly could be a little bit more that these campaigners here are hoping can be done going forward.
All right, Leon, we got one more question for you. My next question requires a brief response. You've got 30 seconds, so give me your best shot. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you say Uganda is tackling the issue of climate change, 10 being the most effective?
Well, again, Uganda is not an exception to the challenges of climate change. But yes, a little bit of work has been done. There have been campaigns on having cities going green. There have been campaigns on having people plant more trees. There have been campaigns on getting rid of non-biodegradable substances, the plastics, what we call here the buvera. So those campaigns have been going on. And yes, it's a bit of a work in progress, but certainly still, like many of the campaigners here still insist, a lot more has to be done.
All right, that sounds like a 6 to me, Leon. Thank you for your insight and analysis. We'll speak to you again real soon. And well, for a better understanding is right back to the studio with you, George. You have my next question. One of the challenges for Africa has been a lack of adequate information on Africa's climate for climate adaptation. To that, you say what?
I think, yes, I could say that there are not enough information on Africa's climate for climate adaptation. Basically because if you look at the Africa's weather system, it's quite diverse. What's happening, for example, in the coastline of South Africa or downtown Mombasa of Kenya and Somalia, they could be completely different. This is because the kind of weather that we have within the region and the continent are diverse. Mm-hmm. And therefore, if you look at more developed countries like the United States, they have information and data that can really help them to tell how the weather in a specific state would behave. That is because there is availability of data in those particular countries. And therefore, what can be done to address this is for the need for African governments and their experts to develop more data that can be used to tell or to develop applications for local communities, people, and also the governments to help them, to tell, to document Africa's information system that can help them to give a more impact-based focused on weather system.
All right, George, my final question to you is, climate change is a global issue. What can Africa do in a truly sustainable manner while limiting global temperature increases?
First of all, I think what African governments can do basically to invest more on a cleaner, green technologies, like the use of, hydroelectric power and solar energy. We've seen more initiatives being undertaken by countries within Africa. Kenya and Morocco are leading in this. So one thing is to invest on clean technologies. And besides that, there's need for African governments also to work with the regional and African established institutions. We have the NEPAD, and I've also talked about the African Ministerial Committee on Climate Change. Through those institutions, there are specific, actions that is required by African countries to, adopt the use of clean energy.
All right, George Achia, thank you. A science journalist and an environmentalist right here in Kenya, Nairobi. We thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
Moving on. According to South Sudan's President Salva Kiir, parties which the peace deal signed last year are ready to form a unity government in November. President Kiir also warned opposition groups that they may be left out of the would-be administration if they don't want to meet the November deadline. Now, our very own CGTN Patrick Oyet has more on that story. Let's take a listen.
National prayers at the State House in Juba to mark a year since the signing of a peace deal between President Salva Kiir and opposition groups. President Kiir says the peace deal implementation is progressing well.
I would like to tell you that in November, we must form a unity government.
Last week, President Kiir held the first face-to-face talks with opposition leader Riek Machar in Juba. Religious leaders in South Sudan are encouraging politicians to build confidence among themselves ahead of the planned formation of the new government.
Other people are our helpers, but they will not bring us peace unless we bring the peace. And it is only we who can bring this peace.
The United Nations Human Rights Commission in South Sudan warned this week the country could easily slide back to war if hardliners are allowed to sabotage the peace deal. President Kiir is urging opposition leader and designated Vice President Riek Machar to return to Juba next month. He says they can together push forward the peace deal implementation so there is no going back to war. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Well, China has sent more peacekeepers to serve in the United Nations mission in South Sudan. The 163 additional Chinese troops arrived in South Sudan's capital on Thursday. China is now among the biggest contributors of peacekeepers to the United Nations missions in South Sudan with more than 1,000 troops. Here is CGTN's Patrick Oyet with more on that.
The new batch of the Chinese peacekeepers comprises of engineers and medical personnel. The troops arrive just 2 months to the scheduled formation of a unity government in South Sudan.
The new detachment of the troop will help to create a favorable condition for the future implementation of the revitalized agreement.
The United Nations mission in South Sudan has more than 14,000 troops across the country. Chinese peacekeepers are credited with provision of protection to more than 150,000 South Sudanese people who continue to shelter under UN protection across the country. The United Nations is warning that the peace deal signed between President Salva Kiir and opposition groups last year remain precarious. The world body, however, says it will continue to support the East African country in its efforts to attain lasting peace.
My friend, colleagues, the time is now. We can make a difference if we accelerate our effort to achieve the commitment made by South Sudan, a commitment that we should all fully support.
China says if peace returns to South Sudan, the role of the peacekeeping troops would change from protection of civilians from armed groups to provision of basic services and building livelihoods. The new troops coming in are expected to champion that change. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
And Tunisia's overthrown President Zine El-Abidine Ben Ali died in exile in Saudi Arabia on Thursday. He was 83. Ben Ali rose to power in 1987 and fled the country to Saudi Arabia after 23 years in office following the 2011 popular uprising against his regime in the North African country. CGTN's Adnan Shawashi has that report.
The image of Ben Ali with Mohammed al-Bouazizi, The street vendor who set himself on fire to denounce injustice has marked the post-2011 generation. Nearly 9 years ago, millions of Tunisians took to the streets and called for Ben Ali's departure. He fled to Saudi Arabia where he wished to be buried.
Ben Ali had been in intensive care in a hospital for 3 months after battling prostate cancer for years. His situation worsened since last month. Saudi Arabia welcomed him in exile and protected the former president until his death. He could not return to die in Tunisia. Ben Ali and all his family are wanted by Interpol since 2011.
The man ruled with an iron fist, while his family and clan controlled the economy. In 2009, Ben Ali was re-elected for a 5th term with 89% of the vote in unfair and undemocratic elections.
The ousted ruler died in exile because he fled the country. He could not control his family and clan. This led to the social protest against his 2 decades of bad economic, social and political choices. Now Tunisia has elected rulers who live, die and are buried at home.
The Tunisian public opinion is divided. Some people remember Ben Ali as a leader, while the new generation blames him for decades of social and economic injustice.
We were living in security under Ben Ali. He should have been buried at home because many people still love him.
Ben Ali has died, but Tunisians want to recover the billions he embezzled from state funds. His family has the money in foreign banks. He impoverished the people. Now we want our money back.
Tens of thousands of political opponents were jailed during Ben Ali's rule. A military court sentenced him to life in prison for ordering the killing of over 300 civilians during the 2010 and 2011 popular protest movement. Zine El-Abidine Ben Ali died days after a free presidential election in Tunisia. Ben Ali was appointed Prime Minister in October 1987. He assumed the presidency 1 month later in a coup d'etat that ousted former President Habib Bourguiba, who was declared incompetent. The ousted ruler remained in power until January 2011. Aden Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Keep it right here on Africa Live. We've got more news for you after the break. Here's a look at the headlines. Child deaths and maternal mortality rates have declined significantly since 2000. Congolese activist wins UN prize for fighting for people affected by conflict.
Economic data out of the country.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Every 11 seconds, a pregnant woman or newborn dies somewhere in the world. This is according to new child and maternal mortality estimates released by the United Nations. Despite the grim figure, the report highlighted that since 2000, maternal deaths have reduced by over 1/3. CGTN's Ousted Tunisian has more.
2.8 million pregnant women and newborns die every year. Most die of preventable causes. The new United Nations report also highlights how women in sub-Saharan Africa die at a rate 50 times higher than those in more developed countries. Children under the age of 5 are the most vulnerable, with 1 in 13 children in sub-Saharan Africa dying before their 5th birthday.
Well, the most dangerous period of life is when you're being born, the first month of life. And the majority of children under 5 die within that period. 1/3 within the first day, and about 3/4 within the first week.
Globally, the rate for maternal mortality has declined by 38%. According to the UN report, countries which focused on primary health care and universal health coverage saw significant reductions.
If a girl is 15 in 2017, her lifetime risk or her chance of dying of maternal cause throughout her lifetime is about half of what it was in the year 2000. Additionally, what we're also seeing is that for all women, your cause of death or what you will eventually die of, the proportion of those deaths that are now maternal, it's actually much declined as well. We're down to 9%, about 9%, down from about 26%. So we're really seeing some trends that are positive.
Malawi, Morocco, Rwanda, and Zambia were among the countries noted for a substantial reduction in child and maternal mortality. Astatal, CGTN.
While the last century has witnessed the greatest advances for gender equality, several hurdles will stand in women's path. In a bid to counter this, Commonwealth countries have pledged to ensure at least 30% of their political leadership comprises of women, a factor that came up at the 12th Commonwealth Women's Affairs Ministers meeting in Nairobi. Leaders from member countries shared the challenges they have faced alongside possible solutions. Here is CGTN's Wilkester Nyabwa with more on that.
They gathered in the numbers. Prominent, trailblazing women from across the continent attended the 12th Commonwealth Women's Affairs Ministers meeting in Nairobi. Here they planned to draw on their shared background as members of the Commonwealth to take stock of the current status of gender equality and how to accelerate progress in this sphere. They found that much has changed since the first meeting was held in Nairobi in 1985. In Kenya, women representation in politics has increased from 10% to 25%. And globally, women continue to rise to higher positions of power.
We have learned that progress for women and girls is progress for all. Most importantly, we are converted to the firm conviction that sustainable development can never be achieved when more than half of humanity is left out in building our nations.
However, women still continue to face several challenges in various spheres. Practices such as early marriage, female genital mutilation, and domestic violence continue to rob girls of their potential.
We all know that education has the ability to transform young people's lives. It is crucial that all girls receive at least 12 years of quality education in order to realize their rights, increase their political participation, and to open opportunities for them to secure better jobs and livelihoods.
1 in 3 women, according to the World Health Organization, 1 in 3 women are affected by domestic violence globally. That's greater than any other issue. It affects the morbidity of women and girls.
These hurdles, together with issues such as combating climate change, championing access to health and equitable economic opportunities, provided areas of robust debate. Each step they take, delegates hope, helps narrow the gender gap. Recommendations from the meeting will be forwarded to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting to be held in Rwanda in 2020.
The global average of women in leadership stands at about 24%, but Commonwealth countries are determined to work towards seeing at least 30% of women in leadership positions in order to ensure that they have a seat at the table and a voice in important decisions. Wilkester Nyabwa, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
Despite the challenges women in Africa face in various fields of human endeavor, some of them are defying societal barriers to make a difference. One woman who is making a huge difference in the African film industry is Nigeria's Chioma Ude, founder of the Africa International Film Festival, AFRIF for short. Here is DJ Adams with more on her story.
So my name is Chioma Ude.
I run the Africa International Film Festival. I've done that for 9 years.
She's one of the change makers in the Nigerian film industry. Every November, thousands of film experts and enthusiasts from across the world gather here in Nigeria for Chioma Ude's week-long Africa International Film Festival, AFRIF. She founded AFRIF in 2010 to basically promote and improve the quality and standards of the African film industry, especially Nigeria's Nollywood, and bring it to global consciousness. And 9 years on, AFRIF is now one of the premier film festivals on the continent.
The festival has given birth to another organization called Envivo, and it's the distribution arm. So for me, I always knew, when you're doing the festival, you see the problems of the industry as you go along. And so I realized, with distribution, we had to do better, we had to do more, we had to come on board. So I've been planning this for the past 3 years. And so this year, November 15th, would launch a new distribution arm that would also impact the economy of Nollywood.
Nollywood is perhaps the biggest beneficiary of our initiative. By recognizing, screening and giving out awards for quality films and performance, AFRIF has in no small measure helped to improve standards in Nigeria's film industry. The festival is also helping to build a pool of young talents on the continent.
Every year, we train about 200 students at no charge to them. We send the best 20 to America, and we did that for 4 years. And so in the 5th year, we had a different program called the Cinemad, and so we started sending them to Paris, and then the program expanded even more, and so with Paris, Poland, and some African countries.
In an industry where women are only very much visible when it comes to on-screen performance, Chioma is holding her ground at the executive level, where important and far-reaching decisions are made.
There's a new term or something I'm new to in Nigeria. People say, I maintain my lane or I stay on my lane. So I've always stayed on my lane. I don't see barriers to anything in life. I've always been that way. My mom will tell you that in a minute. So anything I put my mind and my heart to is going to be done.
Her tenacity and staying power are creating positive effects in the African film industry. And Chioma is already looking beyond film. She's currently working on a new education project that would help almost anyone to get a university education without being in a classroom. But as for politics,
no.
Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, to the Democratic Republic of Congo now, where a Congolese human rights activist has been feted for his efforts in fighting for the rights of refugees. For over a decade, Evaristo Mfaume has been championing for people displaced by conflict in the country. CGTN's Laura Wallo-Bengo has more.
Evariste Mfaume is the regional winner for Africa for the UNHCR Nansen Refugee Award. This is in recognition of his work in peace building for his country's troubled South Kivu province since 2013. Through his NGO, Solidarity of Volunteers for Humanity, he has also been advocating for displaced people.
I've witnessed people get killed, I've seen women get raped, I've seen people's property looted and destroyed. But I'm also a human being, and as a human being, I felt there was something I needed to do. Even though I didn't have the means, I couldn't keep quiet. I had to do something.
The conflict has displaced millions of Congolese. That's according to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Through his organization, about 150 farmers, among them refugees from Burundi, have been able to rebuild their lives through communal farms that Mfaume helped them set up.
We will take the harvest to the flour mill, and the money we make from it will help us pay school fees for our children.
We used to discriminate and didn't care for the refugees. But when the project started, we came together and got to know each other. We share thoughts, we are together, whether in sickness or in health.
In the course of his activism, Mfaume has faced numerous challenges, especially in the fight for women to access land in a predominantly patriarchal society.
When you give someone land here, that is the most important thing you have given them. Land here means identity, land means power, land here means you belong.
Since 2006, over 19,000 families have returned back home to rebuild their lives. Mfaume says equal access to land where refugees and the local populations can work together is key to peace and stability. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
The potential dangers of vaping is creating headlines around the world. India has banned all e-cigarettes, while 2 U.S. states have banned flavored vape products. But is this backlash fair against a technology promoted as being less harmful than tobacco? CGTN's Dan Williams reports from Chicago.
The e-cigarette industry is under pressure. Although this vapor continues to use his device, there's a growing backlash against vaping. An outbreak of lung disease among users of electronic cigarettes has led to a string of deaths, as well as hundreds of people, including many teenagers, being hospitalized. National and local leaders, from US President Donald Trump to Chicago's Mayor Lori Lightfoot, are ready to step in.
We must act, and we will.
Lightfoot is among those calling for a ban on flavored e-cigarettes, calling them a gateway for children to get addicted to nicotine.
And so the flavors are what makes students think that this is an innocuous product, that it's just something that, kind of tastes good, and the students often tell us there's really nothing to this. It's just oil and a flavor. It's like drinking a Kool-Aid when we know that it's not.
The US states of Michigan and New York have already banned flavored vape products, while India has opted for a complete ban on all electric cigarettes.
The global e-cigarette industry is estimated to be worth almost $20 billion, with a huge array of products now available. And some say the backlash against vaping is not justified.
A recent UK government study estimates that e-cigarettes are around 95% less harmful than tobacco.
With all the news that came out, I noticed we have less new people coming in.
Larry Eng opened Level Vape in Chicago 5 years ago. He fears former cigarette smokers will now return to their old habits.
A lot of people, they probably have just continued to smoke cigarettes because at least they know the outcome of that, and because they're misinformed as to what the real reason is, for the people getting sick.
Many of the illnesses across the US have been linked to those who use e-cigarettes to vape THC, the active ingredient in cannabis. But Jonathan Klein at the University of Illinois at Chicago believes the risk to all vapers remains.
From a medical and from a public health perspective, vaping has really become an epidemic. There are people who were never smokers who are becoming addicted to these products as their first entry to nicotine.
The vaping industry is under pressure, and there appears to be a growing chorus of people lining up against it. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
The news continues on Africa Live. We've got your business news coming up next after the break. Here's a look at what's ahead. Relief as pilots at Kenya's cash-strapped national carrier call off their planned strike. Fuel retailers in South Africa pledge more investments to retain jobs in the vital sector.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. The Kenya Airline Pilots Association has called off a planned strike against recent plans by Kenya Airways to hire foreign pilots. The pilots had issued a 7-day notice demanding that the airline stop hiring pilots on contracts for its Boeing 737 aircrafts. They accused the airline's management of habitual intentional non-compliance with the signed collective bargaining agreements. Kenya Airways outgoing CEO Sebastian Mikos, however, said that the looming strike was just another strategy for the pilots to renegotiate. The CEO argues that hiring contracted pilots was aimed at reducing costs in a bid to maintain the airline's market share. And Ethiopian Airlines has reported an 18% growth in profit. A surge in passenger numbers by 14% helped the airline overcome rising fuel costs and a slowdown in the global economy. Planes were 3/4 full on average, enabling the carrier to fly 12.1 million passengers in the year through June. The airline has developed a new 15-year expansion strategy after achieving its Vision 2025 goals 7 years ahead of time. Part of the plans include the construction of a new airport in Ethiopia and a hotel with a 1,000-bed capacity. It expects to add 25 more planes this year, bringing its fleet to 144 planes. The new aircraft will enable the airline add 11 routes, expanding its destinations to 123 by the new year. And South Africa's Fuel Retailers Association will focus on growing jobs and skilling its workforce over the next 10 years. The country is the biggest petroleum consumer on the continent. The sector has remained resilient in tough economic times, but it needs to prepare for the onset of the fourth industrial revolution and a move towards a greener industry. CGTN's Angelo Coppola reports.
Fuel is an important driver of the South African economy. The retailing side contributes over 6% to GDP, which is around $14 billion. It's also one of the country's biggest employers.
The fuel retailing industry employs over 80,000 employees. It hosts over 4,500 service stations, which is SMMEs. So it is important in a number of ways because it provides that level of employment. It also provides more opportunities for people to enter the space.
The sector is poised for modest growth, but it's under pressure to evolve like many other industries in the country.
We really need to think and see what we can do to ensure that we are there, we are keeping up with the fourth industrial revolution, so that we can only do it through reskilling of the employees that are in the industry.
I'm getting an opportunity to be a dealer franchisor. So what I would do is buy a franchise from an existing dealer under a certain oil company. And then there's channels where they assist you with training, finance, because there's a lot of barriers to entry.
With a gradual rise in electric vehicles on the road, petrol stations will need to pump money into upgrading infrastructure. A tough ask in a sluggish economy.
We'll probably need more space, a little bit more space on the forecourt, because the charging time of the cars is a lot longer than the filling time for fuel. So that means expansion on the forecourt of more parking bays. It means on the C-store, we'll need more seated areas.
The turnover is very massive, but the margins are very small. Crime, obviously, it's a big issue. It's a countrywide, not only for fuel industry, but the entire country, we know about crime. Like recently, truck driver strikes or wage negotiations, and then there are strikes, things like that.
The fuel sector has remained resilient despite slow growth, currency weakness and global volatility. It's banking on a petroleum-heavy transport sector and a growing middle class to sustain development over the next couple of years. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The African Union is working towards creating the largest continental free trade area among a population of 1.2 billion people. It is estimated that implementing the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement will boost inter-African trade by around 60% by 2022. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
In July this year, Africans agreed to trade together as one market, but they still have to agree on how to create a system to allow a product or service to be traded duty-free across the region. Negotiations are ongoing. Economic experts say each country should position its exports to make the most of the continental free trade area.
So if Kenya can provide and produce energy at much cheaper prices, then it should sell to the sub-region. If DRC can produce energy at much cheaper prices, it should produce and sell to the sub-region. And somebody else will do the roads because they know how to do it better. And so it's essentially leveraging our collective expertise and allowing those who need to develop different pockets of their economies to do that. And that is, I think, the benefit of the CFTA.
Statistics show that more than 40% of African companies say lack of access to information affects business environment across the continent. The UN says this can best be solved by countries compiling information into what it calls a country business index.
The African Continental Free Trade Area Country Business Index asks the private sector exactly that. How are you finding this trade area? What's constraining you from using it, or how, in what ways are you able to use it? And then once we've gathered this information, we can feed that back to policymakers so they will know far better what they need to tweak, where they need to make changes.
The project has already been rolled out to Zambia and Cameroon for testing. In 6 to 9 months, it will be in all the countries in the continent alongside the new trade arrangements.
It has to go concurrently. So the index is to review the effectiveness of the agreement. So the agreement is in place, and then the idea of this is to look at it and to see what's working and what's not, and then to feed that back into the process so things can be tweaked and refined.
For small-scale traders, free movement across borders will be a huge boost. This remains a challenge at the moment. Some countries still require African citizens to apply for visa before entry. Some have begun relaxing their immigration laws. For instance, Kenya, Mauritius, Rwanda and Seychelles have opened up their borders to African nations without visa. Others like Ethiopia are offering visa on arrival. The journey towards 90% tariff liberalization within the continent has begun, and the African Union has set a deadline of July 2020 to take off into a tariff-free future. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Still in Nigeria, the government recently shut down the Nigeria-Benin border temporarily in a push to boost local rice production and counter smuggling. However, the move has subjected most of the sellers to unforeseen losses due to the high cost of operation. CGTN's Wilkester Nyabwa has the details.
Nigeria recently closed its border with Benin temporarily in a bid to boost food security. For the smugglers, it is now riskier to sneak through a few packets of basmati rice just to satisfy hunger for imported rice. This means the days of heaping 50-kilo sacks of rice across the saddle of motorbikes and slipping a few notes to a customs officer are now over.
Few of the items we sell are produced in Nigeria. Some items like macaronis, granite oil, even sugar. We used to get them from the Republic of Benin. But now that the border is closed, we can't go there anymore. All the items we sell now are the items we got before the closing of the border.
The number of sacks of rice smuggled across the border has also significantly reduced. As a result, the prices have skyrocketed, affecting those who are a part of the country's $50 minimum wage bracket.
A bag of rice for 50 kg of rice, before it was between 9,000 and 8,000 naira, but now it costs from 17 to 20,000 naira.
In August, President Muhammadu Buhari ordered the closure of the border to push for his plan to end Nigeria's dependence on oil revenues. Despite cheap goods hampering domestic producers, many are terming the move an extreme-level protectionist policy.
Since government has not made provision before you can embark on a policy, there should be a provision so that people will not be suffering. We are not against the closure of the border, but government must provide solution. Our people are suffering. The suffering is getting out of hand.
The government has previously encouraged development through the same strategy, which brought about some success. However, despite local production of rice rising by 60%, the output is still not enough for the 190 million Nigerians who spend about a tenth of their food budget on the staple.
According to the president, said if we stop the smuggling,
the economy of this nation will get better. But with that, we near border, we're not feeling fine. We are not feeling fine for now. Because for this area now, they are selling rice like 10,000, 11,000. But for we to carry it from here, reach our house, my house is not even meet 1 kilometer to this place. I cannot carry rice to my ordinary rice that I eat. The soldiers will collect it.
The Badagry market, usually teeming with activity, now lacks its usual buzz. Not only is there almost no rice, macaroni, cooking oil or sugar are also not available. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN.
Time now for another short break. We've got a lot more amazing, wonderful, and inspiring stories coming your way. Here's a look at what's ahead. Egypt embarks on project to rehabilitate country's architectural heritage.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Cairo has been wrestling to preserve its cultural heritage. Houses and buildings have been demolished and replaced with modern houses in recent decades. Professional restorers are participating in massive projects to protect Egypt's architectural heritage. The aim is to provide the capital's visitors with more to see than just ancient Egyptian remains. CGTN's Adel El-Maroui gives us more insight in the following story.
Cairo is 1,050 years old. It has seen so many changes. Moving through dynasties of the Islamic Empire for 10 centuries, the Egyptian capital had numerous facelifts. Each has left a unique collection of architecture to testify for the glory of its period. Struggling between demolition and restoration, today many of these buildings are suffering.
The biggest challenge to preserve this architectural heritage is to create awareness among citizens who live, work and visit these places, to encourage tourism in these places so sponsors would be interested to participate in one way or the other.
With about a quarter of Egypt's 100 million population living or visiting Cairo daily, vertical expansion is essential. In many districts, it is common to see buildings getting demolished, its land cleared, then replaced with higher constructions. So Cairo is always in a struggle with those who disregard heritage for business.
This is one of 3 buildings here in Maspero area which have defied gigantic corporations who wanted to clear the entire area to build a multi-million-dollar residential and commercial area here by the Nile. They have not only won the fight, they have dictated the architectural design for this new project.
We remove slum areas which are close to ancient sites or buildings. We never remove a heritage classified building unless it's about to collapse. We preserve whatever we find. Maspero Triangle is planned to be a massive development project. Only 3 buildings remain, and they won't be demolished because they have remarkable value. The new buildings will be planned and designed to preserve harmony in that area.
Cairo's architectural heritage is distributed over 700 acres. There's at least 3,700 buildings enlisted to be preserved as ancient constructions.
Cairo is working in more than one project to bring the unique nature of downtown buildings. In other areas, the government is removing all the random buildings built over the years. The main purpose is to convert Cairo into a city of heritage and get it enlisted in UNESCO.
The Egyptian capital has been a vital touristic destination, mainly for hosting the pyramids and the Egyptian Museum. Soon, it will be rebranded as a city of a much richer and more diversified cultures. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
You are watching Africa Live on CGTN. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a look at what's ahead.